All right, we are live.
All
Live.
right, guys. Welcome back to another episode. And today we have someone really special.
Yes,
It's
very special. The OG of Malaysia, one of the OGs in Malaysia. Yeah.
all right. So we have Jonathan Wong with us today. If you guys don't know who Jonathan Wong is, Jonathan Wong is actually a very good, a very successful weightlifter and powerlifter in our country at the moment. All
Mm.
right, and Jonathan Wong also does he does teach quite a bit of strength and conditioning with Fit Malaysia, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So I'll probably let Jonathan introduce himself. Probably he's going to do a better job than I am.
I thought you were doing the introduction.
Yeah, I know quite a bit of Jonathan. I mean, I've heard a lot about him, and I've seen him compete in front of
Yes.
my own eyes.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
make sure it's safe all the time. And I always see him going neck to neck with Dylan. With
Mm.
Dylan. It's always a neck to neck competition between these two. Like, who is going to tip over who.
Yeah.
And it's really fun to watch. I like those kind of competitions. They brought it to the Asians, they brought it to the nationals.
Yeah, it's been going.
Yeah.
It's been going on.
Yeah, it's been going on, and they're tit for tat with each other the whole time.
Mm.
All right. So, Jonathan, can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experiences and the accolades that you have?
Right. So, thanks again for having me on this podcast. It's a real pleasure to be invited to chat you guys. So, a little bit myself. So, I've been involved in the fitness industry since 2003. So, coming to like 20 plus
1 years.
years. Yeah. So, and kind of throughout that period, I've been involved in different segments, from working as a part-time gym instructor between my diploma and degree for audio engineering, and eventually became like my full-time passion. So I've done like the whole gamut of things. I've gone from floor instructor to personal training to group classes. I used to teach like body pump, body balance, RPM, right? And then from there, I went into more personal training. Started the first CrossFit gym in Southeast Asia. That was CrossFit Malaysia. This was back in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
So, and throughout that time, basically being involved in, CrossFit, strength conditioning, and now at this point in time, and throughout, of course, I've been competing. I've been competing in, various sports: adventure racing, rock climbing, mountain biking, and I think the one that's really stuck with me is the barbell sports,
Mm.
both weightlifting and powerlifting, right? So I kind of started my competitive career, so to speak, 2013, where I competed in the Singapore Powerlifting Open as well as the Singapore Weightlifting Open on the same day. That was the
Wow.
first ever like super total by accident, right?
The
Not by
super total.
intention, not by
Super total,
intention.
man.
So it worked out that I did my weightlifting competition in the morning, and then I had a 1.5 hour break, and then I did the powerlifting competition in the afternoon.
That's
Right.
crazy. That is
So
so.
it's definitely not something I want to repeat again. It was definitely an experience, right? Because it felt great, like to try to attempt both. But I think like I was kind of like the week after, I felt like a truck had run over me and gone over a few times,
That's
right?
15 attempts, man.
Yeah, so that was kind of how it all started. I mean, I actually got into CrossFit because of the weightlifting element. That
Mm.
was what caught my interest, and eventually I realized that I actually enjoyed the weightlifting, the barbell work a lot more than burpees. Let's be honest, right? And so that's kind of how it started, and from there, my progression from CrossFit and functional training, I started to delve more into strength and conditioning, which is currently what I'm mainly doing. So from a professional standpoint, my focus is number one, coaching people one-to-one and small groups for strength conditioning, and specifically weightlifting. And the other part is, I think, like Arvin, you mentioned that I do education as well. Yes, I work with Fit Malaysia, developing and delivering continuing education courses for trainers, right? So both in terms of sport specific like weightlifting, and also like kind of like strength conditioning, where if you're looking to kind of advance where you are as a personal trainer, then you go the next step. Right. So that's kind of like my professional part. So on a kind of competitive part, I've been lifting as a masters lifter representing Malaysia since I turned 35, which is back in 2016. So it's been some time, right? So so recently, of course, most of it I have been competing mainly for weightlifting, but last year I decided to foray into powerlifting again because the weight classes matched.
Yeah, there was a change.
Yeah, that was changed. So I used to compete as a 67 kilo weightlifter. So and the thing is, like, powerlifting was either 66 or 74. Cutting down to 66 was way too low for me. 67, even getting to 67 was effort, right? To cut down to that weight, because my stand around body weight was typically around 70, 71, right?
Mhm.
So, and when IWF changed the weight classes to weightlifting being 73, I decided to move up. And then I realized, hey, hang on, IPF is 74,
Mhm.
right? So it really matches perfectly, because I've always been interested in both barbell sports.
Mhm.
Weightlifting being very dynamic in nature and very powerful, and whereas powerlifting being a true test of strength, right? So that's kind of where I derive enjoyment. So, and that's kind of where I got back into weightlifting. So in 2023, I did a number of competitions. I did the Strength Academy Classic, which I won. And then I did the Asia Pacific Masters Games, which I competed in weightlifting, which was a gold medal finish as well. Then subsequently after that, I did the national championships for 2023, which I came out on top, gold medal finish. And then world championships for masters weightlifting, I finished in a bronze position, right? And finally, of course, last year was kind of epic. I did 3 powerlifting competitions. So I did the
Mhm.
Asian championships, which I came out with a bronze as well. So that was 2023, and this year has also been interesting. I, I defended my national champion title for powerlifting in the Masters 1 category. And I recently came back from Gold Coast. That was the World Masters Cup for weightlifting. That was a gold medal finish as well.
Wow.
So that's the past 2 years. So recent competition.
Wow.
Wow,
That's a lot of goals.
there's a lot of gold medals. Yeah, that's very impressive. So,
Yeah, it is. It is.
I've known about John since the Pushmore days, which was the first CrossFit box in Southeast Asia. So since then, it's always hear about how he's uh, brought up the community. He's one of the pioneers, and because of what he's done in the past, and also like what he's done now, he's continued to remain um, a strong
Figure.
influence, yeah, a
Mm.
strong figure, and has a strong influence on many of the weightlifting aspects. So it's very good to see that since then until now you have continued to improve the quality, especially the classes, the coaching that you do on bringing up weightlifters here in Malaysia. That's very admirable to see individuals like you continue to do that. And of course, like you competing in both weightlifting and powerlifting has definitely given people more of like a point of view on it is very much possible to do both sports, right? But obviously, we have a good amount of questions for you that we will go
Sure.
deeper into your current journey. I think Arvin can set the first question.
Yeah. So, as you said just now, you competed on both powerlifting and weightlifting,
Mhm.
and you know that as you said, weightlifting is more power based, and powerlifting is pretty much very, very one rep max strength based.
Yes. That's right.
Though those two do have the areas of intersection, like a Venn diagram,
Mhm.
but they are actually two different elements or two disciplines of sports.
Correct.
You know, so as an athlete who's actually doing both, how are you actually being able to balance the training for both these disciplines?
So I think, like, my approach to the barbell sports is, I think of myself as a weightlifter who does powerlifting,
Mm.
right? Why I say that,
I could see
because,
that in
like,
your deadlifts.
yeah, right. Yeah, and recently, of course, I think nationals, you saw I was pulling conventional in my weightlifting shoes, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're like, why is he wearing weightlifting shoes?
Yeah. So I mean, I approach it from that way because, like, number one is weightlifting definitely is a lot more technical and less forgiving in terms of how much technical ability you have, right?
Mm,
So, like, for example, I feel like definitely with the squat, bench, deadlift, if you have some technical flaws, you can kind of grind through it.
Mm.
Whereas weightlifting, you either have it or you don't. There's no grinding,
Yeah,
right?
mm,
That's kind of the room for accuracy is that much. Whereas
yeah.
powerlifting, if you kind of misgroove it, you have a little bit of room to kind of recover, right? But weightlifting, that window is really, really small, right? So um, the way I approach training wise is I look at the technical skill of weightlifting first. Then I look at where I need to balance out in terms of powerlifting, right?
Mm.
So In terms of training, like definitely if somebody wants to do both sports, I would say that number one, powerlifting definitely gives you, and I think a lot of people kind of get into powerlifting first before weightlifting, right? From what I've spoken to numerous people I've bumped into at national at competitions and also community events, is people feel intimidated because weightlifting looks very technical and difficult, so to speak. Right. But here's the thing, right? If you do powerlifting, you really have to develop the base strength for the sport. So the difference is that you need to spend time developing the technical ability for weightlifting. So my advantage was that, I started out, really working on weightlifting first as a sport, right? But before that, I do come from a strength background, so like, in the early days, all the information you had on training was basically, Muscle and Fitness, Flex Magazine. These are basically all bodybuilding, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where I started. I started basically as a bodybuilder, right? Of course, like I was kind of trying to use bodybuilding to help me improve in sport. So at that point in time, when I got into fitness, I was a very active rock climber. So I was like, I can't keep rock climbing to improve, right? There must be a better way to get better. And that's kind of how I started my journey to also understanding strength and conditioning. Like, oh, okay, you can train in the gym to help you in the sport, right? So that's kind of how I started. And of course, eventually I got into CrossFit and started exploring weightlifting. So I think like the approach here is technical proficiency first before like building strength, right? So if let's say, for example, if you have a strength base already, then your bias should be more towards developing technical proficiency, right? It is possible to develop both at the same time, but it's definitely going to be a little bit harder because technical proficiency work, think of it as a skill, right? A lot of people are trying to bypass basic skills to do the cool stuff, right?
Exactly.
Right. So, and whether it's powerlifting or weightlifting, right, the basics don't change.
Yeah.
Right. So number one is whether powerlifting or weightlifting, on one, you got to get your positions correct. Right. Then number two, once positions are correct, we need to link the positions together, right? Your start position, your midpoint position, your finish position, whether it's a squat, bench, or deadlift, or a snatch and clean and jerk, these are the unifying factors. The difference is, like, for example, like powerlifting, you can probably do it like, and again, like this is what I hear from a lot of coaches and how they cue is that it's about developing tension at your start point and maintaining the tension throughout your lift, right? So that's kind of like constant. Of course, there are kind of like variations and differences, and both of you lift as well. You know that it's not really absolutely same tension all the way from start to finish, right? But what makes weightlifting challenging is that weightlifting is like a wave. You have points where you need to be relaxed, some points where you need to be aggressive, and then you need to relax again. So it's the variation and control of between relaxing and being aggressive that makes weightlifting challenging. And that's what makes it interesting as well for me, at least. The technical requirement to perform a snatch, for example, it's up there with like doing a golf swing. Right? In terms of, because if you talk to golfers, right, I train golfers for strength and conditioning. If I talk to golfers, right, when we dissect the golf swing, it's like in my head, right, I'm like dissecting the snatch with them. It's the same level of technical ability. So it's important to understand that weightlifting, a lot of people kind of think of it as just a movement or workout exercise, but it's not. It's a skill. It's a sport.
Of course.
Right? So as long as you approach it with that mindset, then you're fine. Because a lot of people kind of just like, if I can't get the technique, I'll try to outmuscle my bad technique. Right, and that's going to be kind of like a highway to getting injured and being basically hitting a plateau, right? So coming back to like how I prepare and train for it is that I think my advantage is that I come from more bias towards weightlifting, so my skill set has been developed. So what I do then is I prioritize maintaining and developing skill, and then the powerlifting work, the SBD, supports that work. So the challenge here is, of course, like, and there are many studies that show this, that for you to hit peak power and peak strength at the same time is actually very difficult, right? Because if you want peak power, you need to move faster. So what happens is that your response in terms of one max work is going to drop. Whereas if you try to increase your one max work, because by nature, if you're pulling heavier and heavier or doing heavier and heavier lifts, you're slowing down, even though you're trying to move as fast as possible, right? So there is that point that is a bit tricky. So like, depending on my training cycle and how close competitions are, I do try to balance that out. I think, like, for example, like last year for Asian Championships, I actually had a long break between a weightlifting competition and then the Asian Championship, so I could really kind of peak well for the powerlifting comp. But like this year, I did national championships, and 3 weeks later, I was in Gold Coast for the World Masters Cup. So it was pretty tight. Actually, in fact, like I did national championships. 1 week later, I did the Zilfig weightlifting championship.
Yeah. You won that too, right?
Yes, I did. Right. So it's kind of a balancing out. So
At
I
this
think
point, it's not fair for you to compete, really, Jonathan.
gonna give
I
charge
think
of it.
I think we're gonna put you through quite a few doping tests.
Funny fact, I was actually called in for a P test
dope
in the
test.
nationals, right?
Yeah.
So I think like if people ask me like I mean people joke like what you on, so I'm on like sleeping enough and training smartly,
Yes. I think that is I think one thing that I will say that is probably the most mind-boggling thing about what you're doing is because how are you like even balancing, because when you talk about powerlifting per se, I mean, I'm doing powerlifting, it takes up so much time just to get like to max out, to improve your technical proficiency in that, especially when you're talking about the bench press and so on, right? And then you also have another lift that is equally, if not more challenging when it comes to the technical perspective of training. And how do you match that together in a week's training, for instance?
Okay, so in general, my training week, I'm kind of looking at about 3 to 4 training sessions a week, right? So in terms of movement priority, depending on what is closer, I would prioritize different movements. So for example, if let's say, in general, I always prioritize power movements first. So that means I always do my weightlifting drills first. So let's say, for example, like typically a Monday, and it's very much across the board. I'll start on Monday with snatch, either any variation of snatch, either a hang snatch, a power snatch, or snatch related drill. I would do that, and I'll spend maybe about 30 to 40 minutes doing that, right? Then after that I'll follow that with say a primary strength movement. In this case, back squat, for example, right? Then that will be followed by my accessory work for the day. Right, so this would typically take me anything between 90 minutes to 120 minutes to complete. Right, so how do I balance out the workload? Now, generally what happens is, because I generally get a lot of volume from my weightlifting work, I do a lot of repetitions. So you're talking about, say, a typical session where I'm working up to, say, 90 to 95% of my snatch max, and I'm doing anything between 10 to 15 sets of singles, right? So that's a fair amount of volume already, right? And then this is not considering like whatever warm-up sets or back-off sets I'm doing at like the loads to kind of refine technique. So when I get to squats, generally for squats, I don't do very high volume. Like I would do like maybe like work up to maybe a heavy double or triple at most. Sometimes most days is a heavy single, and then my back-off sets will be maybe doubles. So I don't do anything up to like 6 reps, 8 reps, or 10 reps.
I see.
So my volume of work comes from my weightlifting drills. Now, that would work because of my percentage of my lift. So my snatch currently is, currently about, 50 to 60% of, about 60% of my back squat. So that gives me a fair amount of volume work there, right? Because if, let's say, for example, my snatch is only at 30% of my squat, I wouldn't get enough volume response from the snatch to be beneficial, right? So that's kind of like a Monday. So I would have high rep or higher volume weightlifting work, heavy lower volume primary strength work, in this case a back squat, and then on that day, then I'll be following up with maybe one lower body accessory and maybe one or two upper body accessory, and followed by core work. That'll be a Monday, right? Then day 2, I'll normally take I normally don't train back to back. I'll say like a Monday, then I'll train on a Wednesday. All right, so Wednesday would be, say, like a day where I'm working either clean or clean and jerk, right? So then I'll start with that, and then follow that with a variation of pull, either a Romanian deadlift or a conventional deadlift, some variation of pull. Again, similar kind of format where more volume on the weightlifting work, followed by lower volume, heavier work on my primary strength component. Then again, followed by accessory. So I would normally have it like this. Then Friday, let's say if I train, that would be like another 90 to 120 minute session. Okay. Then on Friday, typically would be kind of like a light day where I'll focus on mobility work. Any accessory work that I think is necessary. So kind of like maybe working rotator cuff work, a very specific small muscle, small joint work, which I feel that, okay, this will help me kind of like just keep the body healthy, right? And kind of body weight drills, stuff like that. Then on Saturday would typically be a heavier day where I might go heavy on, let's say, my snatch and clean and jerk, right? And bench press, I kind of just throw it in somewhere. Lah. You guys can see, where's his bench press, you know?
Yeah, I was waiting for it to like, okay, this guy like train his bench like before he's called to the platform or something like.
Your mic, look.
Yeah, it's like.
Your mic.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if where the bench was actually going to be introduced.
Yes.
Maybe he benches like right before his call to his first attempt for his bench rest.
Yeah.
so-
Okay.
so-
Let's straight bench now.
Yeah, let's bench now.
Yeah, so the thing is, like, primarily, like, in terms of upper body, like, etc., I actually prioritize doing strict barbell presses more and dumbbell presses more than the bench press, primarily because of the support it gives to overhead positions for both snatch and clean and jerk, right? So and typically, like, most of my prep for powerlifting course, especially bench, I only start benching maybe like 6 weeks out. Right? Before that, I'm still doing pressing work. I'm doing like a lot of things like weighted dips. I'm doing like dumbbell presses. And it does have a high carryover for me. I mean, and of course I'm biased towards kind of pressing work because I generally feel that I do pretty decent at that. So I think my best at a body weight of 72 kg, my best strict press is like 92.
Wow.
Right. So I generally do quite well with that. Right. So and I kind of like my bench press is normally something that is generally going to be lower priority. I'll talk about that in a moment, but. So that's typically my week. It'll be like three days. There'll be like 2 heavy days, 1 light and 1 moderate. And of course, depending on how close I am to competition, the kind of like volume and loading will change.
Okay,
right?
That's very interesting. All right, cool. Now that you I mean, of course you did a lot more weightlifting initially before you transitioned back to powerlifting. What has been the most difficult part when you talk about like transitioning from weightlifting to powerlifting actually?
I guess it's managing fatigue, right? I think that's the biggest thing. Like, because like, even when I was training weightlifting, I would do pulls, I would do squats, I would do pressing work. So it's not like massively different. So the difference is now because I'm trying to peak for powerlifting comp, I am pushing numbers higher. Right. So like when I used to kind of train just weightlifting alone, I wouldn't really focus on trying to max out or go super heavy on my pulls and my squats. Right. I would do what I need to do to support my weightlifting. Right. Whereas now I have a definite goal that, okay, I want to hit a certain number for my squat, I want to hit a certain number for my bench, I want to hit a certain number for my deadlifts. And it's balancing that out with, of course, the fatigue that comes from the weightlifting, because I'm also trying to push those numbers up, right? Because like, on a competitive basis, I know what numbers people are doing on a world level, like, to be in the top 5. So there's certain numbers I'm aiming for if I want to podium. Right. So I think it's kind of like managing that fatigue. So like, for example, something that I've recently been doing, and it works quite well for me. I only deadlift like conventional heavy once every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Right. In between, I'll do like variations. I may do like clean pulls, which is a slightly different start position. I'll do like Romanian deadlifts, kind of heavy conventional deadlift, like going 90% above. I only do that every couple of weeks. And that actually worked out quite well in terms of helping my recovery. Right, and managing fatigue, because I find that heavy squats is much more easy for the body to recover from than heavy deadlifts.
Yeah, I think I agree with that actually. Actually, that's a very, very good perspective to give. I mean, a lot of us talk about how to balance between like hypertrophy work and strength, but rarely do we talk about how to balance between power movements and strength, because this is a different kind of matchup. Which is not very common actually. It's actually not very common at all in our country. There are very few people who can do both disciplines of weightlifting and powerlifting together. Normally it's the other way around. People do powerlifting and probably
Some weightlifting
bodybuilding together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question. Wait, I'm trying to frame it properly. So number one is, what would you say because you mentioned you do more vertical pressing than horizontal pressing, right? What would the ratio be for someone like you who's currently programming right now? What's the ratio like? Like maybe say in your off season, you don't have any competitions lined up versus when you are preparing for a powerlifting meet.
Okay, so I say right now, I'm just come off a competition last week, 2 weeks ago, right? And I'm actually currently 9 weeks, about 9.5 weeks out from Masters World Championships in Finland.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm starting my prep for that right now. So right now, horizontal pressing is basically really low priority.
Okay.
Like if I don't bench, it doesn't matter to me,
Okay.
right? So, but vertical pressing definitely is going to be something at least because like if you do, let's say for example, you talk about a snatch is overhead, you
Yep.
do a jerk is overhead, right? So in between, I'll slot in things like dumbbell pressing, maybe barbell press, push press. So vertical work basically is very important component. Vertical pressing specifically, especially if you're talking about very weightlifting specific, right? Because it just supports every position that you're working on, right?
Mm.
So where versus let's say if I'm kind of training for powerlifting, then I would have one horizontal press day, one vertical press day.
Mm.
And again, like of course, when it was closer to com, I was definitely benching more often. I was benching twice a week, right?
Yep.
Because I just needed to put in the volume to get the positions, right? So, and again, like even if you talk about bench press technique, I basically am not like super technical on that. I would say like my bench press is okay,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like definitely not in a very aggressive powerlifting style position, right? So it's definitely more biased towards upper body strength than actual kind of like entire body tension, right? And I'm okay with that because like we talk about bench press. Why don't weightlifters bench press? Right, I think that's one of the things that come up
Yeah.
often when people ask me, and what's wrong with the bench press? Is there something wrong with the movement? So it's not so much the movement itself, but it's just the position they're in, especially if you're talking about bench pressing powerlifting style. If you look at the setup, right, it's basically the body is in this very huge extension, right? Thoracic extension, and then you have a lot of tension through your posterior chain to create that drive, and you have a lot of retraction of the shoulder. So basically, you're kind of like in this position here, which is the complete opposite of weightlifting.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right. So what happens is being in that position so much, it's not so much the shoulders that get tight, but the entire body just becomes very tense. Right. So yes, it's some people do have some amazing thoracic mobility to be able to get the kind of thoracic extension to kind of raise the ribs and get the optimal position. But weightlifting, generally, you're not in that position. You're generally more neutral. Like, if you talk about overhead position, I don't know if you guys can see. So if they say overhead position here, generally weightlifting, right, you're going to have ribs down and this open like this. Whereas
Mm.
bench pressing, you're like retracted and up.
Oh,
So the problem about being in that position very often, it starts to create a lot of tension in that area. Then it starts to affect your vertical position.
would
Mm.
you say like when you're doing your overhead movements, especially when you snatch and at the end of a jerk, right? You're pushing yourself through between your hands.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's actually like maybe the better way to think about it is instead of pushing the head through, we are thinking of moving the body forward, right? So the whole reason is that you're trying to create a stack from the barbell to your center of mass,
Okay.
Mm.
right?
Okay.
So because correct.
makes
Because if you're like this, right, in this position, you see my arm is in front of my ear, the bar is
Yeah.
forward of my center,
Yes, of course.
right?
So that makes quite a bit of sense. But I've actually heard a Chinese lifter before say this, that too much bench pressing actually comes in the way of their rotation speed.
Yeah, correct. Mainly because they say like if I'm benching a lot, it's very interior, right? Whether you bench powerlifting style or bodybuilding style, your anterior delts, your pecs are still working, right? To a higher or lesser degree. But so what happens is if you're kind of really tense here, it's affecting your external rotation, right? So your speed of external rotation is less. So that's one thing. Like especially when I start benching more, I actually spend more time trying to working on maintaining my shoulder mobility.
Mm.
I actually feel a distinct difference when I'm benching and then when I'm not. I actually need to spend more time kind of opening up, especially like if we're talking about the pec major, not really, but it's definitely the pec minor into the bicep and the anterior delt. This definitely gets tighter for sure, right? And that would definitely affect the turnover into this position, your speed, right? So that's one of the reasons also why you don't really see lifters bench pressing because it affects both internal rotation and external rotation. But you do see a lot of weightlifters doing weighted dips.
Yes.
Because weighted dips, you're in that very extreme internally rotated position. So that actually that's why like you look at, okay, they don't bench press, but all these like weightlifters, they're like jacked, they got like chests and triceps and shoulders, right? Where this coming from? So there's all this stuff like weighted dips, weighted pull-ups, and they have a lot of accessory work as well.
Yeah, but if you see their squat, then there's their deadlift, and then there's their bench.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, and primarily because they just don't train that movement.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I do understand why the bench is low because simply you don't spend much time in it.
Yep.
You're definitely not gonna build the strength in that. But it's for a good reason because simply because it's gonna affect what
Yeah, so
actually matters, which is the clean and jerk and snatch.
yeah, so
You
if
know?
you look at it from a strength and conditioning perspective, right, when we selecting movements, right, so bench press is definitely low priority because in terms of skill transfer to your weightlifting movement, it's a low priority movement, right? So I mean that's just the nature of sport. I mean if you're a powerlifter, then it's high priority because it's one of the competition lifts, right? So if you look at that sense, that's why bench press kind of on the not only because of getting tight oil kind of thing, but mainly that if you look at skill transfer, the time you spend doing a bench press, you're probably better off doing dips because that has a higher skill transfer to what you actually want to do.
Exactly. So that makes it even more harder for someone like you who's doing both. Competing both, and your bench is not exactly that bad. It's actually
Well,
pretty good still.
it's just for all the overhead pressing.
Yeah, I know. So Dylan, if you're listening to this, he doesn't even bench much, and he still benches more than you.
Okay.
Irving's words, not mine.
So another question to follow up on the previous one was that, how do you feel training for powerlifting has it benefited your weightlifting, having uh, done a type of training that forces you to push your back squat, your deadlift to a very high level of strength output, right?
Mhm.
Do you feel like just training by that alone has carried over onto your weightlifting? Not the technical sense, but you feel different?
Well, so I think when I kind of shifted to working on competing powerlifting again, I think the biggest thing would probably be it's definitely given me more room in the tank, right? Because I think before I was kind of going back into powerlifting, I think maybe my heavy maybe one rep max for my back squat probably 170, 175. Right, because I never really pushed it. That was kind of like what I needed. So, but right now, I think the last national champs I did the 195, right? So it's definitely given me more room in the tank. So what I find that my capacity to do higher percentage lifts for weightlifting is definitely improved, right? Because
Mm,
of the fact that my upper limit strength has gone up.
So
mm,
do you think as your deadlift and your squat strength improves, your weightlifting moves also? I mean, your lifts are also improving with that.
So this is where the thing is, right? For some people, it may be a very direct correlation. So, and this, of course, is individual differences, right? So for me, I've always been more biased towards strength, right? So and so weightlifting wise, what has always been a limiting factor for me is actually technique, right? So for me, of course, when the strength goes up, it gives me a bit more room. I have more capacity to train more reps. But for some people, you have some people where technically they're really, really proficient and you show them a movement once, right? They do try 2 or 3 times and they get it. Typically, what I see with those athletes like this, they generally have a lower strength threshold. So for people like this or athletes that in this kind of situation, when moment the strength goes up, immediately you see a direct correlation with their snatch and clean and jerk going up, right?
I see.
So for me, I think what changed was that I feel that I have more work capacity now, right? But in terms of direct correlation to me lifting more, that's actually more technical. So the indirect way is that because I have more room to practice technique and more capacity to practice technique, my lifts improve,
All
mm.
right. So
right?
in
So it's
that
an
sense,
indirect correlation.
yeah. So in that sense, what is it about powerlifting that you think you enjoy more than weightlifting?
I think it's just pushing the body to that upper limit of what you can do, right? And and it's like so to give an idea, right? So powerlifting is I feel I don't know, maybe other people might think of it. In the powerlifting competition, right, it's like a slow burn. It's like you're doing your squat, your bench, your deadlift, right? Whereas weightlifting, right, it's just like boom, like your 1.5 hours your competition is done. Powerlifting, we're
Mm.
looking at 3 hours, sometimes even more. Right,
Mm.
3 hours is pretty fast, I think. Right?
3 hours is fast.
Yeah. And so weightlifting is very exciting, very dynamic, and it's the kind of pressure you have going into lift, even though it's your first attempt, right? It's definitely a lot higher than I would say for powerlifting, right? And weightlifting, right? 1 kilo difference, it's huge. It's
Mm.
like you go up 1 kilo, right? Even though percentage wise to the lift that you just did, right? 1 kilo out, you say 100 kilos, then you go 101, right? It's like a 1% increase. But mentally, that increase is 100%.
Mm.
Right? So it's that kind of excitement that's weightlifting. But powerlifting, on the other hand, right, is how far can I push that limit? How do I strategize my lifts, right? Because you see people kind of have different strategies. Some people open low on their first attempt, and then you see the difference between the third and the first attempt is huge, right? There are some people who do that, they do big jumps, right? And then there's some people like, for me, I plan my lifting attempts like how I do weightlifting. I don't do really big jumps,
Mm.
right? I will go maybe like, for example, the recent competition, I went like 180, 190, 195 on my back squats. So nothing crazy, right? 15 kilo difference between my opener and my third attempt, right? Where some people you see like 25, 30 kilo difference, right? So powerlifting is definitely like exciting in a way that it really pushes me. I feel the challenge is that, how far can I push my upper limit? Right. And, and for me doing both is like, I enjoy both sports, but the other thing is like, I think one thing is my personal enjoyment, but the other thing I think like on a bigger scale is like, I also wanted to actually demonstrate to people it's possible to do both and stay healthy. Right. And to be able to do it like sustainably, right? It's not just a one-off thing, right? I can do this sustainably with the right approach and understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good thing to be passed on and taught, that is not like go in hard and then get burned after that, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah,
So
I
so
think
that's
I think if you're approaching or going about that kind of philosophy towards your training, I think it's a very healthy and positive message to send to the younger generations, that you're not just doing this for, say, vanity purposes, or like wanting to chase a title of being like, oh, the first person in Malaysia to achieve a super total so and so, but more of like it, like you, if you love both sports, this is like a very sustainable and healthy way to do it, because you want people to be doing this until they're old and gray, and not just in their 20s and 30s and then burn out and then become idle and inactive.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very good message that you're sending out there.
Well, I think like the bigger part, I mean, you bring that up, like, being obviously like, being on a podium and in a competition is definitely part of the pursuit as well. But I think like even if I wasn't competing, I'll be doing both.
Yep.
Right. Because like, it comes down to like, I do enjoy the barbell sports, right? And why should I have to choose one over the other when I can have an opportunity where I could do both, but I got to do it smartly? Because like you said, I don't plan to do this like only one off. I do want to try to do this for as long as I'm able to, right? So, and I think of it long term as well, right? So because like if you talk about masters competition for both weightlifting and powerlifting, you basically, as long as you can step on the platform, you can compete, right? So, and like, for I haven't powerlifting, I haven't really delved into the masters division as much, but definitely for weightlifting, the most senior weightlifter I've ever seen step on the platform was 85 years old.
Oh my God.
And it was impressive. I mean, he's not lifting a whole bunch of weight, but the fact that this dude is 85 years old and he's able to snatch, I think that's really impressive.
Yeah, of course. I mean, every time
Very,
you see a Masters 3 step on stage, during Asians, we had the Hong Kong guy, right, who's what, 80 over years old, that stepped on stage and lifted, and that's super impressive. And doing weightlifting, I think, is far more impressive, because there's a speed requirement in that.
Correct.
And the age where speed deteriorates, you're talking about someone who's doing something that's power driven, which is very, very impressive.
Right.
And I think that I would want to touch on something that I think you spoke about earlier, which is you do actively teach strength and conditioning.
Yes, that's right.
And I think there's not many of us who actually have the CSCS cert in this country, at least. Okay. And it is something that I think, I don't know, maybe people fear it.
Right. Yeah.
Because of how intense the modules are and how difficult the exam is. But as someone who's been teaching this module for a while, do you think do you think it's an important step up for trainers in this country?
Yeah. So so the first question is, I think, like, whether you should do it. I would say definitely continued education is always a must. Right. And even for me, like, why am I doing education? Because when I teach, I learn. Right. People come up with questions and situations, and number one is, of course, I hope to share my experience so that the up and coming generation of coaches and trainers can do better than what I did. Right. Then number one. Number two is the questions come in, like sometimes, maybe I know it in my head, but because the question hasn't been framed that way, I never thought of it that way. So when the question comes in, oh yeah, that's a really good question, that let's dive into this, let's break it down. Right. So, and we talk about CSCS. So Now, the thing about CSCS, number one, why is it intimidating is number one, the requirements for CSCS, I mean, basically it's a certified strength conditioning specialist. It is a American certification. So the requirements to do that, number one, is what puts a lot of people off. You need to have a degree of some sort, right? And honestly, for me, I've studied all the material, but I've never done the exam because I don't have a degree, right? So people think that I have it. I'm very honest with it. Don't assume it. I'm very honest that I don't have a CSCS certification. But the thing is, I've actually delved into all the material because I'm a bit nerdy that way, right? I like the science, right? So, and really, like, unfortunately, like, this is again my personal opinion on the exam is that you study all this to pass an exam, but by and large, a lot of people pass the exam, but they still don't know how to apply the knowledge.
Correct.
So that's a huge disconnect, right? And some people may agree with me, some people may disagree, but that's my personal observation and personal opinion on that. So what we're doing right now, especially with the certification I'm teaching with Fit Malaysia, is that our focus is not so much on getting the certification. The focus is on you taking this information and applying it. Right, so that's the difference. Right, the modules are definitely intense. There's a lot of information. I mean, like initially when we first started this teaching this course, it was a 4-day course split between theoretical and practical work, and there was a certification exam. Now, what we found that everybody was trying so hard to pass certification, they were missing the point of the course. So now what we've done is we've taken away the exam and we've changed it to be very, very practical focus on the initial module, so that you get to pick up these tools that you can, let's say if you do the course from Friday to Saturday, on Monday, you can take something from the course and apply it to your client straight away. Right, so that's the difference. Like we are trying to change it away. Like people are being intimidated by the exam, but really now we change the conversation. Don't worry about exam. Let's talk about what you can use from this course to help you be better for your client. Right.
Now, wouldn't you think that an exam would actually test whether you actually understood the material in the first place?
So for sure, the exam, I think it's not to kind of bang on like exam is not important. I think that's very important. But I think like where we're positioning now, if you are interested in doing the exam, you can study towards the CSCS, right, rather than having a separate exam for it, right? Because like one of the issues we see that is that people start focusing so much on exams that they miss the point of the course, right? So we focus on getting them to be prepared. Now, that being said, that's the kind of like initial kind of like right now we have that strength conditioning course where we want people to kind of be basically inducted into this whole thinking mindset of what it means to be doing strength conditioning. What's the difference between doing general fitness and regular personal training versus strength conditioning, right? You start with that. Then after that, what's happening is that now we are developing further modules where we focus a lot more on the technical aspects, like the theory, right? So the long-term progression is that as we do this, we are moving people towards thinking and asking better questions.
Yeah, right? I think that I mean I do understand where you're coming from with that. Okay, because I'm also a firm believer of there must be a standard level.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, so the exam test that, okay, so like even like you're talking about anything, like you're talking about medical school, right?
Yeah.
Why do you have to go through 2 years of housemanship before you even get to become a proper doctor? Is actually for us to know that you actually have the basic knowledge for you to be safe.
Yep, correct.
And we have a standardized exam that is like verified by multiple professionals that okay, this is a safe level.
Yep.
But I do agree with you that many pass the exam and don't do anything about that knowledge beyond that.
And again, I would say that this is basically not just with fitness certifications, it's across the board. Like, I mean, people pass exams, and what does that demonstrate? That you've achieved the basic level of competency.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I think like, that's being said, like, with the strength conditioning course, we do recommend that you come in having done a personal training certification already. Right, you're going to get more out of it. Of course, we do have people who are kind of doing it because they're interested in it, kind of like they're interested to gain knowledge to train themselves, and that's okay as well, right? And of course, like I think long-term wise, we want to move people towards using these modules as preparation for the CSCS, right? Rather than actually having a specific exam for this course. And and again, like what we are doing also is a work in progress. We are always looking, how can we do this better, right? So initially we started with an exam module and certification module because we felt that we want people to have a basic level of competency. But then what happened was that we started to see that a lot of people were kind of falling in between the cracks, right? So then we switched it to the current model where it's more practical focus. And the difference is the feedback from the participants. The participants felt that, like in majority of feedback, the participants are telling us that I learned a lot. I could take a lot of information which can apply straight away to my interaction with my client in terms of programming, in terms of like understanding how to make the right exercise selection for their goals, right? And I think for now, the low-hanging fruit is to get that kind of feedback. Then when we develop future modules, because we are working on that right now, we're looking to move it towards something where we come to a point where, okay, you've done 3 modules, to get a certificate, you need to pass the exam, both practical and theoretical. So I think like we were probably introducing the exam a little bit too early, right? But I think that's something that we want to move towards over time, because like you said, it's important that we establish that somebody has a basic level of understanding so that number one, they're competent, and number two, they are able to prioritize safety for their clients. And
right? Okay, that's good advice. All right, so let's wrap this up. As someone who's lifting into your masters, and I think this is something that is to be celebrated. Actually, not many people actually have the resilience to live through the years. And for yourself, you've been lifting since 2003, which is 21 years into lifting. You're still competing actively and still winning medals. And that is very, very impressive at someone your age. So the thing is, we have a lot of young lifters. I mean, you've been to the nationals recently. You see our lifters are getting younger and younger, and we have more of them. But what I do realize is there is always the risk of them burning out very early too. So what would your advice be for someone who's competing at this young age to maintain their longevity in the sports?
Well, I think I think the first thing probably is not so much from the physical aspect, but I think from the mindset is that I think a question that everybody should ask themselves: what am I doing this for? Right? And you don't have to have the answer straight away. I think it took me a while to find my own answer to that question. Is that I think at the baseline for me, I really enjoyed the sport. Right? So and then that goes to then my next question is, okay, if I really enjoy the sport, how do I keep doing this for as long as possible? And then the question comes, then after the answer to that is, okay, I need to train in a effective, safe, and sustainable way. And that basically flavors how I've approached it over the years, right? So I think the first question is that, what am I doing this for, right? And then I think from there, everything will follow. And I think it's definitely like, if you're kind of going very elite level competition, it's definitely hard on the body, and you need to understand that certain choices and sacrifices will be made, whether in terms of lifestyle, whether in terms of the load on your body, and you need to be very clear on that and not be in a situation like, I regret making that decision. You need to be very clear from the start. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I think that can only happen because right now, of course, we have a lot of younger athletes. I think this is a responsibility of us athletes or people who are doing the sport longer to pass on the word like, hey, I noticed that you're doing this, like you may want to reconsider that because this could shorten your career as a lifter, right? So, and it may seem like like the busybody uncle, right, so to speak. But if I see something that looks really like dangerous or potentially could be hurtful, I will point it out to someone, whether they like it or not, because I think that it's very irresponsible if I see something like that and not say anything, right? I think more harm is done when you don't say anything than saying something, right?
Yeah, but we also live in the world of Karens,
Yeah, of course. So I think of course, I think the other part is, of course, I don't just randomly go around and give advice to people. Definitely, there's people that I have a certain relationship with.
Yes.
Right. So even for me, like people giving advice, I actually don't like it if somebody gives me random advice in the gym. Like, I don't know who you are, you don't know who I am, and this may be inappropriate advice for me. But if I know somebody and I have a certain relationship with them, say, hey, will you be open to trying this out, right? I do notice you're doing this a certain way, but have you tried it this way before? So again, like I think there you can do this with a soft approach.
More like a big brother relationship, right?
Yeah. So I think that's important. But I think, like you say, in terms of advice, like definitely number one is ask yourself the question is, or I ask myself this all the time, what am I doing this for, right? And then the second thing is like, enjoy the sport, but at the same time, take care of yourself, right? Because like, any sport you do at elite level, it's I think there was this study done where they get to compare, right? Elite level athletes in terms of general health markers, right? Their health condition, right? If you don't know, they're elite athletes, actually is similar to people who are sick, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you talk and say this is general health here, we draw a spectrum, right? General health is here. This is health, wellness, right? This is you're healthy. If you're sick, you're here. And on the other side, if you're elite athlete, you're here, right? Because the amount of stress that's put on your body is similar to somebody who's sick.
Yeah, I think this has been spoken before. As people confuse health and fitness. I think because fitness for a sport requires, as you have mentioned many times, that you have to train to a certain level of intensity, and you have to
Yes.
push your body to that extreme that you are not. You cannot be in the best of recovery and the best of fitness. Everything can sit in the best area if you want it to be. You want to be the best athlete there is, So you do have to give in to some things, and take some other things, and that will also make you more vulnerable to other problems as well.
Yeah,
Injuries.
so yeah, correct. So I think like in terms of advice, like I think number one, be clear why you're doing this thing. If let's say, for example, I want to compete to a certain level, I want to be, say, national, regional, or even let's say world champion,
Mm-hmm.
then understand that there is a correlated price you need to pay, right? So if you kind of understand clearly with your mind, okay, you understand this is what the price I need to pay, and I understand that, I accept it, then okay, that's your choice to make. Who am I to say like, you shouldn't train like that because you could possibly strain yourself or hurt yourself, but your goal is to be world champion. And I understand that because I compete as well, and I know that if you're kind of pushing the limits, as much as you want to train and reduce injury, you can't say that you're going to be injury free.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you sit down at home, you could trip over something and get injured as well, right? So the goal with training, I think, is to reduce the incidences or chance for injury as low as possible while maximizing performance,
Yeah.
right? So I think like, as a younger athlete, you need to think about, okay, how long do I want to do this sport, right? Am I doing it for just right now? Am I doing it for long term? Like, where do I see myself going, right? I think these are questions that are valuable to ask. I mean, I don't really think I thought about questions like this when I was younger,
Yeah.
because like, I just enjoyed the sport, I had fun doing it. But now more and more, I start to think about longevity and sustainability, right? And
Yeah, I
that's,
think you develop a certain level of maturity as you go
yeah,
through the years, right? Yeah.
yeah,
So I
for
think that's
sure.
what you're talking about. Yeah.
So I think like that's something that I think as a younger athlete I didn't really think about it. I didn't have this sort of thoughts in my head maybe 10 years ago, right? Versus now, right? And I do think about, okay, if I train this way, can I sustain this training for this period of time, or can I do this like this? If I do this for 6 months, is this sustainable? If I do it for 3 months, is this sustainable, right? So, and then if I know that, okay, this kind of training I can do it, but maybe for like 4 weeks and I need to cycle out, right?
Mm.
So these are kind of things that I start to think about a lot more. And I think like the good thing now is that there are a lot more information and there's a lot more coaches who are knowledgeable. And it's actually a great time to get into both weightlifting and powerlifting because there's so many resources available. I mean, when I got into weightlifting, man, I couldn't even find a coach. I basically learned everything from the internet, right?
Yeah.
Until I found my coach, right? Who I still work with on and off, right? So I think like number one, if you're really serious about the sport, learn from somebody who is way better than you, right? If you want to really have longevity, find a good coach,
Mm.
right? That's really important because even you have the best talent in the world, if you don't have a coach, you're never going to maximize that talent, right? Number one, find a coach, right? And number two, right? Find a community that supports you both in good times and bad times. All right, whether it's like one friend or two friends, and people who will tell you, hey, I think you're pushing a little bit too hard. Maybe you should just step back. Because sometimes you need somebody to tell you that, hey, I think like you might be going, stretching yourself a little bit too thin. Right? And I think like for me, like, I used to get offended when people tell me that. Right. And now I'm like, okay, maybe I'm seeing something, somebody else is seeing something. So I would step back instead of getting like upset or angry. I would step back, like, am I missing something?
Mm.
Right. So I think like the difference is now with like you say, maturity, right? I Instead of reacting, I step back and think about it first.
Mm.
Right. Okay, did I miss something there? Then we dissect it, right? And
Mm.
I think that's a similar approach now as a trainer and a coach as well. When I see somebody doing a different methodology, which is different from mine, it used to be fact like, oh, the guy's different from me. He doesn't know what he's doing.
Mm.
And that's being very honest. Like this is what I used to think, how I would used to think.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
Yep.
And but now I'm like, hey, that's something different. I might get like a bit upset because it's different from me, but let's look at the data. Does that work? I mean, if it works, I want to use it. If it
Mm.
works better than what I'm doing right now, I want to use it. So, and it used to be the conversation like, if I adopt somebody else's method, it means that my method before was bad and that bruises my ego.
Mm.
Right now, but now I'm like, hey, I think if you are my client, you would really be reassured if I'm always constantly reviewing myself. If I find something better, I'm going to learn that.
Yeah.
Right. So I think like, and similarly, if you're an athlete, I think you should be that approach as well, right? Don't get stuck in a rut, right? If somebody offers you advice, your first question should be, does that work? Instead of, it's different. This is how I always done it. I'm going to do it this way.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. That is good advice. There's a lot of really good nuggets in there for a
Yeah.
lot of us to actually use and apply. Look, anything else you want to ask him?
Let's see. Okay, if you went from a weightlifter to a powerlifter,
Yep.
but what about the opposite? So you mentioned just now that a powerlifter already has that base strength, and you would
Yep.
want to transition to weightlifting.
Yep.
So,
How do you do that?
yeah, how do you do that? Or is there a class or a sessions that you offer yourself for these individuals?
Okay, so right now, I do have some collaborations with Strength Academy. So
Yep.
every once in a while, I'll have a series of classes there. So if you're kind of interested, whatever background you come from, if you're interested in doing weightlifting, check out their current schedule.
Alright.
I do have some classes scheduled for July. Can be a starting point. Now, in terms of like the wider community, there are places like, for example, Fat Cat Athletic Club, Zeal Fit, Vanguard Weightlifting in District 13, locally and within PJKL. These places all offer weightlifting classes. So that's a good starting point. So if you're transitioning from another sport, specifically here, your question being like, I'm a powerlifter, I'm interested in weightlifting, learn the technique first. Don't worry about the numbers.
Mm.
Learn how to move first. If you have the strength, the numbers will come. Right.
Okay.
So learn the technique first, because like let's say if you're somebody who is completely sedentary, okay, then the different thing is you have to learn technique and get strong at the same time. But if you already have a established base in another barbell sport, for example, powerlifting, transitioning weightlifting, most people who are powerlifting already have decent squat and pull numbers, right? And that's what you need for weightlifting. So the key thing here, if you're transitioning from powerlifter to weightlifter, you should be focusing on technique. And I do have a number of people that I work with privately who have done that. So, and honestly, like the transition is actually easier than you think, right? Because the strength base is there, because you have that work capacity already. You don't actually get tired working technique, because, for example, if my squat is 150 kilos and I'm getting you to practice that reps with that 20 kilo bar, you're going to be able to do a lot of reps before you fatigue. So that means that you have room to practice. You have the capacity to practice more, right? So always technical proficiency first, then the numbers follow.
Nice.
So what is a competitive number for someone who weighs 100 kilos? Asking for a friend.
Okay, so if you look at, say, competitive, right? I mean,
Within
basic,
locally.
so basic numbers
number that you know.
yeah, basic numbers kind of we look at like in terms of markers. Like if you talk about competitive, like it really depends what competition you're doing. But you talk about, say, markers that we look at, that I would look at for somebody who's getting to weightlifting. Number one is the first goal will be a body weight snatch. If you weigh 100 kilos, you want to snatch 100 kilos. Right?
Okay.
Of course, and this will be something that you work out at over time. So we have the markers like 50%, 75%, 100% of your body weight. Then the clean and jerk will be like, same thing, 75%, 100%, 125% kind of thing, right? Or even up to 150%, right? So most proficient lifters are kind of around the 120 to 120%, 125% for snatch versus body weight. right? And about 150% or more for clean and jerk to body weight ratio. Then, of course, you have some outliers. Like I think recently in one of the amateur competitions, there was this guy, shout out to Eugene. He's a 55 kg lifter. He attempted 118 kilos on his clean and jerk. That's more than double body weight.
118.
Yeah.
118, right? So that's impressive. I mean, kudos to him, right? But really, like I think like those are the markers you look at for yourself first, right? In terms of percentages. Another way, of course, we can look at it relative to, let's say, your strength numbers. You're looking at anything between 60% or slightly more for your snatch relative to your squat.
Okay.
And clean and jerk probably closer to 70 to 80%. Of course, the more proficient you are, the higher you can use it, right? So I've seen like guys where their clean and jerk is like 90% of their squat. Right? For guys, like for women, men and women like this, if their squat goes up, their clean and jerk will go up. Very simple.
Okay.
Very simple. So that's kind of the starting point, right? Of course, if you compare to elite, I mean, elite is just ridiculous, the kind of numbers they're moving.
Yeah.
Right. I think like the lower weight classes have people doing triple body weight clean and jerk.
Yes.
Right. So and equally impressive, all the women outlift me lah. I mean,
That's the world standard.
you're talking about, let's say, at world level, right? You look at say the closest weight class to where I am, I'm 73, right? The 71 kilo women, right? Their clean and jerks are something like 160 to 165 kilos.
Gosh.
I'm doing like something like on a really good day, it's 130.
Arvin doesn't even bench that much.
So I mean,
bro.
I mean, it's just interesting to see. Like, I mean, just a side kind of like as you're wrapping things up. I mean, kind of like just giving perspective in terms of numbers, right? So, I think like, what's the Arvin? I don't know if you're familiar. What's the best back squat for a 9 kilo lifter? What's the weight class? 83.
83.
Then the weight class above that?
83, then 93.
93.
Okay, what's the best like back squat for a 93 kilo lifter?
93,
locally?
I think at the moment we have is must be maxes lah. Max is I think around 280. Yeah.
No lah,
280, right?
300.
270.
Yeah.
Oh,
So comparatively, like so we have 270, 280, right? So weightlifting, the weight class I think closest to that would be 89 kilos, right? So Tian Tao, he's an 89 kilo lifter from China. There are videos of him casually back squatting 300. His front squat, I think he did something like 270.
And this guy's like this guy squat like deep one.
Yeah. Pause.
with some flimsy ass belt.
Yeah, the weightlifting belt and then cotton knee sleeves.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, I've seen really impressive squats and
yeah. So another one you can look at. I think some powerlifters follow him. This South Korean lifter. His name is Lee Sang. There are videos of him squatting 250 for reps. He's a 67, 73 kilo lifter.
The bracing technique is impeccable.
Yeah. So 250 for reps. I think there's a video of him. He did 200 for 10 or something like that. So it's just interesting to see that elite level. Obviously, of course, you talk about elite level powerlifting, they're moving some amazing numbers as well. But it's just like, I think like definitely for weightlifting, what's fascinating for me is not just the amount of weight they lift, but the manner that the lift is performed. That's really what makes it interesting, because like, the guy is just, casually kind of walking up the bar and racking it and just squatting it, and then like, there's some, you can even see some older videos, right? They finish their back squat and then they just put it overhead in front of them, right? So I mean, it's just a level like, retired lifter Liu Xiaojun, like, there are videos of him squatting as a 77 lifter, squatting up to like 300, something like that, right? So you can find all this stuff floating around on the internet, like, so it's interesting. But I think I think like what makes the sport interesting is that not to get too stuck in your lane, but to be open to see what's happening out there. Right? People have questioned like, John, why do you shift to low bar squat? Like, I'm just comfortable with a high bar, Right? So same thing, like, why do I wear weightlifting shoes for my deadlift? It just feels better for me, right?
Yeah. I mean, you do what's best for you, lah.
Yeah, same. Like why people ask me why I don't low bar squat when I powerlift. I high bar squat all the time. I'm comfortable like that.
Yeah. So I think that's where I think if we are open I mean, I try to be as open as possible. That's when your possibilities are like, it's out there. You can do whatever you want.
Mm.
All right, that was a very good chat with Jonathan Wong. I think we've learned quite a bit about both weightlifting and powerlifting done within one person. Okay,
Super
which is
total John.
it's a very rare combination, at least in Malaysia. And I'm happy to see that you're excelling really well. And I do want to see more competition on that platform, especially in the powerlifting scene. And it's really fun to watch, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Really, really fun to
so
watch.
we'll see. I think like for this year at least, I don't have any other plans for another powerlifting competition.
Okay.
There is Asian Championships happening year end, but I think like I may sit that one out because the competition schedule has just been quite packed.
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll see how it goes, lah. Right?
We will see. We will see.
We'll
All
see.
right. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having
all
me. Thank you for having me. It
the
was a
things you have
pleasure.
told us
Right.
and we've learned from you. And guys, do catch this episode. We will be airing it soon. So till the next one, thanks
See you
again.
guys.
Thank
guys.
you. Bye bye.